Hey guys, it's your tired teacher here. It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and I'm here to record another video with you guys. Yeah, apparently I don't sleep either. So, anyways, let's go ahead and talk today about the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams. So, this is our early republic stage of the country, and this is going to wrap up period 3 for us. With the election of 1800 and Thomas Jefferson. So let's go ahead and get some historical context for that pivotal event. And how to get historical context for that event is to go ahead and look back at not only the Constitutional Convention like we did last time, but to look at George Washington's presidencies and John Adams's presidency. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the OG himself, George Washington. So pretty much George Washington held this country together, during our times of war, during our, strife with the Articles of Confederation, during the Constitutional Convention. He was the presiding officer, and here he is, stepping up to be our first unanimously chosen president by Electoral College, George Washington. First president to be elected. So his election occurs on April 30th, 1789, and thus George Washington is going to roll onto the scene as our first president. So he picks an interesting group to be his cabinet, and this is pretty much, after the Constitutional Convention, it kind of is a sort of team of rivals. Well, when you consider Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. So George Washington has as his vice president the runner-up in this election, which was John Adams, fellow Federalist. We have Thomas Jefferson, who is an outspoken Anti-federalist at the time, as his Secretary of State. Edmund Randolph as his Attorney General. Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of Treasury, and Henry Knox as the Secretary of War. So those are our first cabinet positions, and seriously, these guys were pretty good at their job, not gonna lie. I mean, yeah, they know their stuff. So honestly, guys, first things first, we need to get this country together. The articles left us in freaking shambles. So we need to go ahead and build things from the ground up, and one of the first things that we do is build up our judiciary. Basically our judicial branch, because remember, under the articles, we didn't have such a thing. So, the Judiciary Act of 1789 is going to go ahead and establish the lower court system for the United States, because after all, the Constitution just said Supreme Court, and that Congress has the authority to establish lower courts. So this is what we're talking about, the federal court system. And so with the Judiciary Act of 1789, with the Supreme Court, there's going to be a Chief Justice appointed, which is John Marshall here, our first Chief Justice, and 5 other Associate Justices. So, mind you, Supreme Court does not have powers of judicial review just yet. It's going to establish that later on with Marbury versus Madison. But for now, the court system is being set up, the district courts, the circuit courts, courts of appeals, state courts, basically courts everywhere, okay? That's what's getting set up, and that's the important thing. Alright, thing number 2 we need to tackle is our freaking bad economy. Let's face it, the articles left us broke because, we didn't have tax revenue. So we have this massive debt to pay off from the Revolutionary War. New England states in crazy amounts of debt from the Revolution. Plus, we had an unstable currency still. The states were still trying to print out their own money. So we need to establish a national currency, right? Make it stable. Plus, we won't have any national bank to where, that institution can loan out banks money, coin money, do all that stuff. We got no such thing. So we're going to have to set that up. Plus, tax system, come on now. We didn't have that. That was the major issue. So, again, we have to set up a tax system. And while doing this, we're going to go ahead and get income for the country that we were severely lacking. So, Hamilton's going to get his checklist going, all right? There's going to be several things on his plan in order to help finance the country. So, according to Alexander Hamilton's financial plan, here's what we got. The federal government would repay both the national and state debts from the Revolution. All right, so that's step one. Okay, step two. National Bank would be created to issue money and make loans. All right. Step three. A high protective tariff, which, if you guys didn't know, a tariff is a tax on imports, would be enacted to protect American industry, which was starting to spring up in the northern states, okay? We're starting to slowly manufacture. So he wants to protect that, so that's a tariff. Now, he also wants to throw in a federal tax on liquor in order to raise money for the Treasury. And seriously, this is going to be along party lines because Federalists support Hamilton's plan. They're cool with it. It's mostly going to be people from the North because, yeah, northern states, super in debt from the Revolution. Alright, people who are going to oppose this plan? Anti-federalists, mainly from the South and the West. Because, let's face it, southern states were good. They paid off their debts. They hate this that Hamilton wants to assume the debts of the northern states. So, Hamilton needs a lot of money to pay back our debt. Because look at this massive amount of debt we have. Like, for real now. And this is public debt. This is debt that we owe to our people. Okay? This isn't really debt that we owe to foreign nations like France or the Netherlands or anything. This is like our own freaking people who we owe money to. Because during the war, we had a large number of bonds being issued, which means these are like certificates that the government gives out, and it's basically like you loaning the government money in order to finance a war, okay? Or to finance like whatever. So, private individuals bought up these bonds to help finance the war, pledging their family fortunes in these bonds, okay? But there's a catch though. These bonds would be paid back with interest at a certain date. However, because of the asinine structure of the articles, you know, a lot of people would go without their money for a very long time. Southern states made good with this, and they paid back the people who bought bonds from them. The northern states, however, did not. So, that's part of the debt we're talking about. Another part of the debt is, well, what we owed to Europeans, right? I mean, when you compare the two, we still owe more money to ourselves, but we do still owe that money to foreign nations. So, we need to come up with a plan to pay back and assume this debt. So, that's what Alexander Hamilton wants to do. He wants to make debt the #1 priority because to him, he thinks, hey, if we can't pay back our friends, they're sure as hell not going to loan us money later. I mean, we could speak from life experience on this, can't we? So, since he thinks this through, he feels we should pay back the debt and make good on it. So, what he wants to do is assume the debt, okay, from the states, which, like we said, angers the southern states because they did good, they paid back their debt. Northern states are happy. But another thing that's going to be controversial is that he is going to purchase the bonds back from whoever holds the certificate. Now here is where we get people like Thomas Jefferson criticizing him because he thinks, oh, it's only benefiting the rich and at the expense of the farmers. Plus, he gets his boy, fellow Federalist, James Madison, to disagree with him as well. Because since there was a lot of speculation going on post-revolution, like during this quasi-period where the articles suck and we don't have George Washington yet in the Constitution, okay, during that period when people were broke, desperate, they were selling their bonds for a very low price to speculators who are willing to pay for them, because the people who originally pledged their fortunes to purchase these bonds Like we said, we're desperate. They needed cash. They needed cash fast. So, for instance, okay, here's how the speculators benefited from this system. All right, take a look at the bond price here in the graph. All right, if the original bond price was $10, but we desperate, we need cash, we sold that bond for $1, okay? The speculator, according to Hamilton's plan, would be paid the $10. Madison's calling foul on this. He's like, what the hell, dude? These aren't the original people who pledged their fortunes to help us with the revolution. These are just like a bunch of asses trying to like get a quick buck. Okay? These guys didn't sacrifice anything. These guys aren't the true patriots. We're screwing the true patriots by doing this system. So, Congress is going to side with Hamilton, assume the debts, pay back the speculator, well, pay the speculators what the original people should have gotten to begin with. And with this, Madison says, see you later, Hamilton. Screw you, dude. I'ma hang out with your number one enemy, Thomas Jefferson. So we get Madison flipping sides now. He is no longer affiliated with the Federalists. Mr. Constitution himself is no longer affiliated with the Federalists. He instead joins up with Jefferson, and they will form a political party in the near future called the Democratic Republicans. I know, confusing, right? But trust me, guys, it'll make sense in a little bit. Okay, so like we said, southern states are fuming at this. They can't believe this crap. Okay, like, just put it to you guys this way. All right, let's imagine you and your brother or sister owe your parents money, okay? You make good with it. You decide to get a part-time job. And you're like, okay, parents, here's your money back. Now, let's say Christmas rolls around, okay? And, or like whatever, like birthday or whatever. Let's say that rolls around. And your parents decide to say, you know what? We're cool. We're going to pay off your debt to like your brother or sister, and they still give them a present. It's kind of like that kind of situation. You're pissed off. You're like, what? You paid back this debt for them when we worked our asses off and we paid it back? Yeah, southern states are pissed at what Hamilton is doing. They feel that it is in favor of the northern states. So in order to appease southern states, what Congress is going to do is move the capital to the south, because it used to be Philadelphia, but now the capital is being moved to the strip of land between Virginia and Maryland, which is now known as the District of Columbia. Well, and the city is going to be called Washington, D.C. So there we go. That's the story of how our capital came to be. Now, here's another thing that's going to happen. Okay, this is one thing that Jefferson and Hamilton so disagree on. It's going to be the national bank. So Hamilton is like, yeah, we need a national bank. We need to stabilize the economy. We need this clearinghouse to like handle the finances of the nation, essentially. Well, rather like, you know, to be the bank of the country. Let's just face it. So he is using the necessary and proper clause to read in between the lines and to say that, you know what, Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the authority to set up the national bank. It's one of these expressed enumerated powers. Reading in between the lines, interpreting the Constitution. Jefferson and company is like, well, hold up, dude. It's not written in the Constitution that Congress can establish a national bank. We disagree. Hamilton gets his way anyways. So the first bank of the United States has a 20-year charter. It's a temporary thing. It needs to be renewed in 20 years. But essentially, the bank has the right to issue currency. It's going to supply loans, be a depository for federal money, you know, be a clearing agent for payments on the national debt. essentially the Bank of the United States. So, the government is going to be more or less like a shareholder in this bank, but it's going to be kind of like privately owned. And I think that was like another contention that Jefferson has. He's like, what the heck? Like, seriously, this is government money going into this thing that's private? Shady. Okay, that's Jefferson's thought process. Okay, one thing that's gonna like piss off people, well, especially farmers, is gonna be tariffs, and it's also gonna piss off people from the South too. Let's face it. All right, so in case you don't remember what a tariff is, here's what we're talking about. So a tariff is a tax on imports. So here's a quick scenario on like what the hell goes on with tariffs. So imagine that the price of steel made in the United States is going to be like $110 a piece of steel, all right? Price of steel from Great Britain is $100. Now, let's say that we want to get people to buy American steel. So what we're going to do is place a tariff, an import tax, on the British steel in order to make the total price more expensive than the American steel. So by placing the $20 tariff on the British steel, now the British steel is more expensive than the American, so the consumers should be forced to buy American. You get me? So that is pretty much like what a protective tariff does. It is designed to get people to buy American goods versus foreign goods. Okay? Hamilton likes this tariff. He sees it as killing two birds with one stone by protecting American industry plus gaining valuable tax revenue. So, a revenue tariff, though, is a little bit different. Its purpose is to solely raise money to run the country, not really to protect American industry. So this wouldn't be necessarily as high of a tax as like a protective tariff would be. So Congress actually goes against Hamilton with this. They don't want a high protective tariff, but they're cool with passing a revenue tariff instead. Now, remember on his financial plan he talked about whiskey? Okay, farmers are going to get pissed. Here's why. So Hamilton wants to raise money for the government by taxing liquor, okay? And he puts on a whiskey tax, essentially. So farmers in Pennsylvania, because remember, middle colonies, breadbasket, yeah, so farmers in Pennsylvania are pissed because one of their main industries is, well, grain, and you use that to make liquor like whiskey. So that's a big industry for them. Distillers, are going to think that people back east are going to be like, yeah, we're doing this for our own pocketbook, screw the farmers, blah, blah, blah. But really, yeah, it's to raise revenue. But they're still pissed. I mean, come on now. These guys fought in the Revolution. They know what's up with, like, taxes. So they feel it's like their government, their new government, being very unfair and taxing them. So what are they going to do? They're going to do what they do best. Go around town, tarring and feathering tax collectors and whatnot. I mean, seriously, they're going to do that. I mean, look at this. They tar and feather tax collectors, right? Parade them around town. Again, tarring and feathering tax collectors, parading them around town. So it looks like the same old song and dance that they did during the Revolution. However, things are going to be a little bit different. We don't have the Articles of Control anymore. We have the Constitution. So they were hoping for a Shays Rebellion type outcome where they ran the show, but what they get instead is Washington marching on in with the troops and be like, all right, federal government is here. So that's essentially what we have. We've got our commander-in-chief leading that army, and yeah, it shows the strength of the Constitution. So here's an AP tip for you guys. They like to compare and contrast Shays Rebellion to the Whiskey Rebellion, and this is how you do it. You use Shays Rebellion to show the weaknesses of the Articles,
you use the Whiskey Rebellion to show the strength of the Constitution. You get that down, you're golden. So, this will be the first and only time George Washington, as president, leads the army to squash a rebellion. Why? Because he is fulfilling the Anti-federalists' worst nightmare in this instance with the peacetime army. Because remember, they criticize that highly because they're like, whoa, we don't like that the president has a lot of power, plus we don't like that he has a peacetime army. Put the two and two together, when they see Washington riding on his white horse leading the army, they're thinking, holy crap, this is like Europe. This guy's going to use the army to his will. When in reality, George Washington, good dude, he wouldn't do that. But to the Anti-federalists, to people like Thomas Jefferson and others, they're going to be like, see, we told you guys. We told you. So George Washington's going to take a clue from that, and he's going to be like, all right, I'm going to step back. I'm not going to do this again. You guys, point taken. So that's why we've never seen a commander-in-chief, well, the president, lead the troops into battle anymore. It's because of that. So let's go ahead and talk about relations with the Native Americans. Okay, now. So, here's one theme of American history. We are always going to encroach on Native American land, and we are going to always come into conflict with it, okay? So, when we encroach into tribal lands out west, in the new territory that we got from the Treaty of Paris, yeah, we're going to run into some problems. We run into some problems in the Kentucky and the Ohio Valley areas. It's going to be native attacks there. So President Washington and Secretary of War Knox are going to send General Harmer out to stop the Native American attacks. And what's going to happen is the subsequent Little Turtles War. Dude, that's the most adorable name for a war. Seriously. But anyways, Little Turtles War was not a very nice war. It was anything but. So here's what we're talking about. Okay, we're going to have the Battle of Tippy Canoe out there. Fallen Timbers will be another notable one. So in essence, guys, it's going to be a crap ton of tribes. I mean, check this out. It's going to be the Miami tribe. It's going to be the Huron, the Wyandot, the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Ottawa, yeah, okay. The Delaware, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Seneca, Tuscarora, Oneida, Kickapoo, Kakashkia, and Wabash Confederacy. So, yeah, there's a bunch of tribes linking up with this one. So, essentially, Harmer's men are going to be victorious, and in battles like the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and we also have the Battle of Tippy Canoe in there. Yeah, we're going to defeat the Native forces. So, essentially, Native Americans are pushed back again. They sign the Treaty of Grenville, and they give up that land that they were fighting over. So, this would be modern-day Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And what we're going to do is open up westward movement to that area with the Public Lands Act, so where people are going to go ahead and settle these areas. And yeah, it's the same old song and dance, guys. Native Americans going to get screwed out of their land. Just plain and simple. Okay, so that kind of segues us into foreign relations at this time. So the big foreign policy thing that we've got going on, honestly, is the French Revolution. All right. What the hell do we do? Because, okay, part of us is like, hey, the French people are following our footsteps, right? I mean, we feel that they have followed our footsteps. They're like our brothers in arms with revolutionaries, revolutionary thoughts in mind. We should support the French people in their revolution. But hold up now. Remember, the French monarchy helped us in our revolution. So we kind of still owe it to them to, help out the monarchy. So we're caught in a catch-22 here. We got no clue who to really back up. Plus, there are some crazy shenanigans going on already in the French Revolution. And by crazy shenanigans, we're talking about the Jacobins, we're talking about Napoleon, we're talking about the guillotine and heads rolling in the streets. Okay? We are hearing what is going on in the French Revolution and how King Louis and Marie Antoinette were guillotined, and we're like, holy crap. Our revolution didn't get that bad. Wow. We were just taken back, okay? Especially the aristocracy in this country. They're like, ooh, we hope our heads won't be rolling in the streets like they are in France. So, Washington's cabinet is pretty divided over this. Now, Secretary of State Jefferson is like, hey man, we need to support the French people. They're leading their revolution. They have just cause. They're starving. They're being taxed. They're being treated unfairly. Their rights are being taken away. We should not be hypocritical and help them out. Support them. Okay. Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, is going to be like, hold up now. We shouldn't support the French people. After all, it was the French monarchy that helped us out. Plus, now that Napoleon's in the mix, we really should be supporting Great Britain and the rest of the European nations, because when it comes down to it, they're our trading partners now, our biggest trading partners. We can't bite the hand that feeds us. So, we should be backing that side. Okay? Jefferson and Hamilton can argue like cats and dogs about this, but what ends up happening is, a couple of things. Okay, the French are going to send over a diplomat, which we're going to refer to as Citizen Genet, and he is going to come on down and try to recruit people under our noses, as far as like, let's get some Americans involved and get them to help attack Spanish Florida and try to fight for the French cause here. So Citizen Genet is going to be there's going to be an arrest warrant issued out for him. Washington's going to grant him asylum temporarily, and essentially he's going to remain here for the rest of his life eventually, but he's going to break traditional rules of diplomacy by appealing directly to the American people for the French cause, and Washington does not like that. You don't do that when you're a diplomat, dude. You just can't. So, but anyway, Citizen Genet does that. And what Washington ultimately decides to do, though, is he's going to declare neutrality. So this is smart when you think about it, because we were in no freaking shape to get involved in another war. I mean, come on now. We barely fended off farmers with pitchforks, right? So, Washington's going to be like, hold up, stepping out of this. Jefferson gets pissed. He resigns because ultimately he kind of sees Washington as like turning his back on the cause, essentially. And this Neutrality Proclamation, Hamilton kind of claims victory over it. He's like, we're not fighting the British. Jefferson's like, screw you guys, I'm resigning. And essentially, we get the best of both worlds out of this, though, because now that we've declared neutrality, we could ship goods to both sides. We could trade with both sides. So, we are gonna benefit financially. Let's face it, we are. So our merchants and shippers could, sell our big crops to the French and the British. So we're not complaining. I mean, that was probably the best move for us, not gonna lie. Alright. But there's a couple things that come out of this. The British haven't exactly been the nicest people to us since then. the British are still going to occupy forts in the Northwest Territory. We're like, what the heck, dudes? You're still on our turf. Get the hell out. Property that was taken by the British soldiers during the Revolutionary War has not been returned or paid for. So we're salty about that. And the biggest thing, the British Navy was seizing our ships. And they're going to be impressing our sailors, which means they're going to be getting some of our sailors, rounding them up, and forcing them to join the British Navy. So these three things are still very contentious to us. So here are the forts we were talking about. You see they're along the frontier, but they're still on our turf. So yeah, we're mad. Okay, so John Jay is supposed to go out to Great Britain. He's supposed to negotiate a treaty to like check off those three things. Okay, so John Jay is going to go and try to negotiate this treaty, but his treaty is very like half-assed. Okay, he is essentially gonna get the British to agree that to evacuate the ports, but he doesn't get them to agree to stop seizing our ships, which is like a big issue. So people are going to be angry at John Jay. They're going to burn effigies of him, even throw cats. Yeah, guys, you notice the cat here? Cat. It's like, how angry do you have to be to like throw a cat? Like really, like, oh, let's throw some bricks. Let's throw some rocks. Oh, here's a cat. Like, what the heck? This is probably like the most hilarious like political cartoon ever in American history. I'm telling you guys, early political cartoons, freaking hilarity. But anyways, I digress. Okay, people angry at Jay's treaty. All right, let's talk about Pickney's treaty, or otherwise known as the Treaty of San Lorenzo. So this one is a better treaty. This one gets the job done. Washington wanted to secure the border between, U.S. and European nations. So Pickney is supposed to work out a deal with Spain. All right. And what he works out is that, hey, we have trading rights now with the port of New Orleans, which opens up all of that western land to farmers. Now they have a route to ship their goods back east, because let's face it, overland routes took forever, but going by ship, a lot faster. So this opens up like a free trade route for us. I mean, this is going to help us out tremendously. So Pickney, good job, dude. You did good. So, with all of this said and done, President Washington will not seek out a third term. He's not going to be about that. Even though people are like, yeah, you can be president for life, dude. He's not about that. He's a principles kind of guy. So he decides to cut it quits at 2 terms, and he sets that precedent for future presidents. So he's got some parting words of advice for us, and here's what he's got to say. All right. Well, first of all, with his foreign policy, I mean, he wanted neutrality. He wanted to be friendly with all nations, and he wanted to establish a military academy to train officers. So West Point, that's his deal. Okay, it's going to follow in Washington's footsteps. But anyways, all right, let's go ahead and talk about his farewell address. So, George Washington has some parting words of wisdom for our young country. He says, you know what, guys? Don't get involved in European affairs. It's just not worth the drama. For real, we would have prevented world wars with this. Okay. Point number 2. Let's not make any permanent alliances. Hello, World War I. We could have prevented you. Don't form any political parties. Dude. We would be so harmonious at this time. Oh, okay. Point 4. No sectionalism. Hello, Civil War. Oh my lord. George Washington's that parent that has like pearls of wisdom that they bestow on their children, and their children are just like, whatever. We're gonna learn the hard way. If only the children had listened to their dad. George Washington, you were too good to us, buddy. We didn't deserve you. So, yeah. So essentially, Washington's going to have some major accomplishments in his presidency. He's going to organize a national government. He's going to develop policies for settlement of the territories, stabilize the Northwest frontier, and a few more states are going to come in: Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So essentially, people are kind of heartbroken when Washington leaves office. Even though this picture down here is when he leaves his general commission in 1783, or rather, this is actually the meeting that took place because of the Newburgh conspiracy. So here's how it goes, and this is a good testament of the kind of person George Washington is. So essentially, remember how the Continental Army wasn't really getting paid regularly? So at this point in time in 1783, prior to the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the Army was still in commission. The Army was still doing its thing, trying to protect the area. Now, there's this meeting between Washington's general staff and like subordinate officers and stuff, and they're ready to lead a military coup on the country. They are so pissed off beyond belief. They're ready just to like turn all out, okay? Washington hears of the plan. He jumped into their meeting and he just all calm, cool, and collected. He's like, you know what, guys? I've prepared a statement. Do you mind if I read this statement? And so, of course, like the dudes are like, all right, General Washington, go ahead and read your statement. So, here's what he has to say. Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country. And with that line right there, grown-ass men who had fought in the revolution alongside him started bawling like crazy because they had no clue. They had no clue that George Washington had suffered that greatly alongside them. So it was just a highly emotional experience for the guys. I mean, come on now. You can see several dudes busting out their hanky. This dude over here on the right is straight up sobbing, you know. Bro hug right there, Washington. It's like, oh my god, please forgive me. This guy up front is like, I'm not crying, you are. So, really, you know, people have become endeared to George Washington. He was the right guy for the job. And he endured a lot of stress. Let's face it, he helped keep the country together for all those years. And so, it's going to take its toll on his body, and Washington will die in 1799. And John Marshall will address Congress, and he will say this about Washington: first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. So with that, we bid you adieu, George Washington. You're too good to us, buddy. Too good. So, as Washington has passed on, we'll leave it up to these two to do the one thing he told us not to do, which is form political parties. But to their defense, political parties had already formed at the Constitutional Convention. Let's face it, Federalists and Anti-federalists, the two squads, are essentially political parties. So, the Federalists and the Anti-federalists were the thing, right? Post-Constitution and during the Constitutional Convention. But remember how Madison switched sides. We're going to have a name change here. Same kind of deal, but different name. So, here's what we got. We've got the Federalists and we got the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists will be the same kind of crew that we saw during the Constitution. It's going to be Alexander Hamilton, you know, John Adams, John Marshall, like, you know, those kind of people. And there's still going to be your wealthier elites. There's still going to be like your professionals, your upper class, and they're going to come from like New England. So these guys are still going to support a strong central government. Now, with foreign policy, of course, they're going to support Great Britain. They're made up also of manufacturers and merchants. They like the National Bank because, you know, they feel it's going to stabilize the economy and be this area where we are able to collect taxes and, stabilize the currency. With voting rights, though, they believe you must own property to vote. So, they're definitely not the party of your common man. That would be your Democrat Republicans. Now, with the combined efforts of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So, pretty much, these guys are gonna believe more in like, hey, if you got merit, you should be able to run this country, not just because if you're rich or high class or well born or anything. So, these guys are going to be strong supporters of like state governments. They're going to want to limit the power of the federal government because, after all, let's face it, these guys are basically anti-federalists, just with a name change. With foreign affairs, they will favor France, and they're going to find their support in places like along the southern states and in the western frontier. So, because of the West, a lot of farmers are going to support them, artisans, you're more working class. And when it comes to that federal bank, they're definitely against it because these guys believe that the Constitution should be strictly interpreted, not loosely interpreted like the Federalists. They believe it's got too much power, right? The federal government's got too much power. Congress has too much power. They don't like it. So when it comes to voting rights, they're going to support suffrage for all white males. We need to lift that property requirement because, after all, they're supporters. A lot of them don't have that, especially the artisans. So essentially, that's your breakdown of the two political parties at this time. And your AP tip for that is that usually AP likes to ask you guys about the differences between the two. So if you pay attention to this table, you guys should be fine. So let's go ahead and get into the John Adams presidency. So, with the Adams presidency, remember, Washington called it quits after the election. It happens in 1796. So in 1796, we've got an election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Are you freaking kidding me? This stream's over again?